Further evidence to suggest why LSU should be considered a frontrunner for the college football playoff in 2025. It's Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making it your first listen. We are free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. And as always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you so much for that. LSU hoops on the floor against Tennessee. This one won't be cool, but the giveaway for the first 1,000 students kind of is. Talk about that in just a bit. LSU has a new NIL initiative. I'll explain, and this is actually very forward-thinking for LSU. That's coming up here in just a smidge. But every year around this time, a guy named Bill Conley over at ESPN, who is the father of the SP Plus rankings, if you're familiar with that metric. And Bill's a good guy. I've had him on my show plenty of times over the years. Bill releases an updated SP Plus rankings about this time. Then he updates it again after spring and after the spring portal and so on when rosters and everything continue to evolve. Well, one of the key metrics in the SP Plus is returning production. It's pretty easy. It's returning production, recruiting, and your recent history. So basically what he uses, now I'm oversimplifying it, but to blend it together and get these SP Plus rankings. Well, I always look forward to the returning production metrics because that generally has been, for obvious reasons, a really good indicator of who the contenders are going to be. You got a lot of production returning. You're a veteran team with a lot of experience. Make sense? Got it. Well, there is one very obvious variable that has changed and is evolving this metric. Now, I'm going to tell you, but you could probably say it with me out loud because you know exactly what it is. It's the transfer portal, or the high rate of transfers, so to say. So, how do you gauge the value of transfers as opposed to returning production? For example, Ohio State just won the national championship. Well, they had a veteran quarterback in Will Howard, but he transferred in. They lost their veteran quarterback the year prior, right? So that's kind of how you weigh it. Now, Bill Conley is continuing to tweak the metric to try to make it catch up, but I'm going to do this illustration for you to make it make sense. So, as an example of how this metric has evolved, let's look at the 12 playoff teams from this past season and where their returning production number was. Okay, so the 12 teams that made this most recent college football playoff, going into the season, here were their numbers. SMU was 11th in the country. Good. Oregon was 25th. Georgia, 28th. Clemson, 32nd. Boise State, 35, Texas, 36, Penn State, 37. You with me? Like, all these teams, 7 of the 12 were in the top 37 in the country in returning production. That speaks to the value of having experienced guys back. Arizona State was 48, still pretty good. Ohio State, the eventual national champion, 56th. Indiana, 58th. Notre Dame, 99th in the country, and Tennessee, 108. Yo. Bottom line is, about half the field was made up of teams that had a lot of returning production. The other half of the field, transfers. Galore. Ohio State, for example, only added 7 transfers, but it was your quarterback, Will Howard. It was the best safety in the country in Caleb Downs. It was a freak show running back in Quinshon Judkins. It was your super senior starting center, Seth McLaughlin, transferring in from Alabama. You see the point? Indiana was 58th in returning production. That's because Kurt Signetti came in and got the whole friggin' James Madison roster to transfer with him. So we're starting to see this evolution. LSU this year for 2025 is 38th in the country. Remember I told you, Boise was 35, Texas 36, Penn State 37. Right there in that top 40, LSU's 38th. And keep in mind, you're 38th in returning production, and that's with losing your top 3 pass catchers, Lacey, Daniels, Taylor, losing your second rusher in Josh Williams, losing 8 defensive starters. Well, how is this possible? We got tremendous value in Garrett Nussmeier and Caden Durham returning, obviously. And then there's Aaron Anderson, who because of the bowl game ended up passing Kyron Lacey and Mason Taylor and CJ Daniels. And you got a bunch of young defensive players that were contributors a year ago, if not starters. Weeks, Stamps, Keys, Spears, Bro. Let me not forget also that Harold Perkins is returning. Jacoby Guillory is returning as well. So while those guys didn't produce for you much because they only played a couple of games each, it's more veteran presence that you're getting back. So LSU checks 2 of the boxes here. Not only are they 38th in the country in returning production, but they also have added this incredible portal class to supplement like Ohio State did. Better returning production numbers from Ohio State than Ohio State a year ago, and even more impact transfers than Ohio State. You can kind of see how this thing is shaping up. For what it's worth, LSU last year, after they lost Daniels and Neighbors and Thomas and Mason Smith and Jordan Jefferson and Mekhi Wingo and all those guys, LSU was 59th in the country in returning production a year ago. So you can kind of see the disparity there. Now, this is the other part that if you're looking at and going, okay, you should be very confident about LSU because of that, because of the returning production numbers and adding the transfers. Here's one of the things that makes you go, Number 1 in the country, 81% returning production, 86% of its offense, that's the most, 75% of its defense, that's 7th most, for an average of 81%. The number 1 team in the country returning production, Clemson, where you open the season. Texas A&M, number 6. Vanderbilt, who you play, number 8. Oklahoma, who you play on the road, number 10. Florida is 18 on the list. Alabama's 35. Then LSU is 38. All that to say, you got some teams that are at the top of this list that you have to play. And that may not fare great for the Tigers schedule-wise, for teams that maybe felt like they were going to be a little bit of a layup coming off of last year that might be set to improve. For what it's worth, Bill Connelly also looked at teams most likely to improve and most likely to regress. How about this? Improve. Texas A&M, you play them. Florida, you play them. Clemson, you play them. Boise State, Illinois, Oklahoma, you play them. Auburn, Arizona State, and Baylor. 4 of the ones they mentioned, you play. Now, you want another reason for optimism around LSU? How about this? Most likely to regress, Ohio State. Ole Miss, you play them. Oregon, Georgia, Texas. What do all these teams have in common? Miami, SMU. What do they have in common? And South Carolina. So you play South Carolina and Ole Miss. But what do those other teams have in common? Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, Texas, SMU, playoff teams. When you are all in on a playoff run, when you do what Ole Miss did, when you do what Ohio State did, when you're Oregon and you're one of the tops in the country, when you're SMU and you're 11th in the country returning production, that's your opportunity. Because the next year, all those guys are gone. So now all those teams that were at the top of those rankings a year ago now are at the bottom of these. And they're very likely to regress as a result. At least that's what the metrics show. So Ole Miss and South Carolina, in theory, those should be easier games for LSU this year than they were a season ago, despite what perception may be. Florida, Texas A&M, That may be more difficult this year because of their returning production. Now, you get both those games at home, which is a major boost, obviously. You got to go to Vanderbilt. And, but getting A&M and South Carolina at home, and going to Ole Miss in a year where they're likely to regress probably serves you well. So all that to say, not just who you play, but when and where you play them, your returning production numbers, 38th in the country, and you're adding, in addition to that, this elite portal class. LSU this year should look a lot like Texas, Penn State, Ohio State did in 2024. That's why I'll say it again. It's impossible to predict what a team will do in a playoff when there are variables you can't control. You can't control the bracket, so you don't know what your draw will look like. So therefore, it's impossible to predict. Oregon was the best team in the country this year, all year. What happened? They got a terrible draw, and they got bounced in the Rose Bowl. Sucks for them. But what you can control is putting yourself in position to be in the playoff. And I will say it again, and I'll say it a million more times between now and kickoff of the 2025 football season. The absolute floor, the basement expectation for LSU in 2025, this team had better be in the college football playoff. When you're in, see what your draw's like, see if you can get hot and go make a run. But you better be in. Because if you're not, it's fair to say LSU in 26 will be one of the regress teams because of everything you're going to lose. And if it's not now, then when? You better make the playoff in 2025. It's Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. March basketball is here, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2-player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. It's fast, easy, and keeps every game exciting. Build your lineup like this week. Maybe you want Jason Tatum for more than 29 points. I love how you can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. Matter of fact, I have notifications set on my phone, so I get notified every day reminding me to make my picks. It's quick, it's easy, and when I win, my money hits my account in as little as 15 minutes. No waiting around. So check it out. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Well, we know that we are nearing the revenue share world of college athletics. And I know this conversation for many people might be a little convoluted and confusing. I'm going to try to make this very simple and explain something that LSU is doing that is actually very proactive and progressive, that is going to serve LSU athletics well in the new era. So remember, what we've been dealing with up until this point is NIL, name, image, and likeness. It's student athletes that can do deals representing their name, image, and likeness. Now, we know what's happened is there's been collectives, and it's effectively pay for play. Well, starting very likely this next year, revenue share will go into place. And this means that athletic departments will have the option to share their revenue with their student athletes up to $20.5 million, which, of course, LSU will do. And as a result, they've had to cut spots in the budget and find new revenue to make money to be able to pay the student athletes, right? You're effectively LSU operating at basically break even or slight deficit. And if that's the case, well, then you got to go find $20 million. We got to cut expenses or make more money. One of the two. We've seen a little bit of both. Anyway, well, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds with that. Well, what's very likely to happen whenever rev share goes live, as part of the House settlement, NIL as it exists presently, the pay-for-play NIL, has to stop. Part of the House settlement, the agreement, is that a third party, Deloitte, will monitor every single NIL deal. I know that's a massive task and a massive mountain, but any NIL deal over $600 will have to be approved by Deloitte as fair market value. So as to say a business can't go to a student athlete and say, I want to do a $500,000 NIL deal for you to show up at my car dealership for an hour on a Saturday. That's not fair market value for that, right? So Deloitte would step in and say, you can't do that. All that to say, that's where we're headed, okay? Brian Kelly did an interview with Ross Dellinger and even disclosed that part of the punishment that's being discussed is things like suspensions. So if a player does an NIL deal outside of the purview of Deloitte, they could be suspended. Hefty fines is what Brian Kelly suggested as well. My point on all that has been, it sounds great in theory. I think we'd all be okay with that. Enforcement is really the challenge. How does this entity enforce these tens or hundreds of thousands of NIL deals that are going to be done? I don't know. Again, it sounds great in theory. Can they enforce it? That's my big question. Okay, I hope that makes sense. The reason, now let me go back to the beginning to talk about this new NIL deal LSU's doing. Athletes will still be able to do true NIL deals on top of their rev share. Well, generating new revenue for rev share and facilitating NIL deals is kind of like the golden goose. Well, LSU has joined a program started by Playfly Sports. If you've ever listened to an LSU game on the radio, you'll hear them say the LSU Sports Radio Network, a division of Playfly Entertainment. Okay, so Playfly effectively gets the broadcast rights for all these schools and then goes and sells the ads, right? So the school, LSU in this case, would take a lump sum from Playfly. So, and then Playfly would take the game and go sell the broadcast. Okay. Well, what Playfly has done is called NILSU Max, and that will provide a legal way for athletes to earn more money on top of their rev share. Follow me. So Playfly has the exclusive right to go provide NIL services on behalf of the athletic department. So Playfly is already selling all these advertisements across all these networks, has relationships with businesses. Now Playfly can go to the business and say, hey, Raising Cane's, do you want to do an NIL deal with Garrett Nussmeier? Okay, and they can act as the intermediary. And for that right, and by the way, student athletes can go do deals independent of Playfly. They don't have to do it through Playfly. But what this allows is LSU keeps their hands clean, right? It's an independent third party, so they're not mixing in the money. It gives LSU student athletes more of an opportunity for NIL deals with people who already have those relationships with business owners. And the kicker is, for those rights, Playfly is paying LSU. Remember, we talked about the need to increase revenue, right? In a revenue share world, you got to increase your revenue or cut budget or both. Playfly is going to send LSU a $3 million signing bonus by the end of June 2026. LSU will also receive $337,500 per year in annual rights fees through 2027. And as long as Playfly provides the NIL service, it'll pay $1 million signing bonus for 2027 through 2029 and a $3 million guarantee annually through the end of the contract. Point is, LSU did this deal where they're getting millions of revenue in hand guaranteed from Playfly. It's on Playfly to go see if they can sell these NIL sponsorships. So it's good for LSU student athletes because they'll have an opportunity to make more money through NIL. It's good for LSU because they can keep their hands clean, and they're also increasing their revenue in a revenue share era. So they found a new revenue stream, found a new way to pay their student athletes. They don't have to do the work, and they keep their hands clean with the NCAA. This is good on every level. And again, players can still go do NIL deals on their own. Remember when NIL went live back in July of 2021? LSU thought they were being progressive, and they missed the mark. Remember, they brought Olivia Dunn to Times Square in New York City, and they had a big NILSU billboard, and it was all, hey, we're open for business, because it's hard to think of it in these terms. But at the time, not everyone was openly on board with NIL. There was a lot of coaches and administrators pushing back against it. Well, LSU said, hey, we're going to be NILSU. We're on board. Come do deals with our student athletes. We're open for business is what they announced. But what they didn't do was fundraise. for their collective for NIL, which is what the schools that got a leg up in NIL were doing. And LSU missed the mark. And they were years behind. And only now are they starting to catch up, which is why this is really encouraging, because this shows LSU is being proactive and progressive for the new revenue share era and finding ways to make sure their student athletes still get NIL deals on top of the rev share, and also are finding new revenue streams to be able to afford to function and exist in this new era of revenue share. So I commend LSU. It's a really smart thing that they did in being ahead of the curve with revenue share and whatever the next phase of NIL is. Now, I'll say this one more caveat. Going back to the whole thing about Deloitte and with collectives, will collectives go away? It's a big question at this point. You can call me skeptical, but my contention is, as long as you have wealthy people who are trying to funnel their money into student athletes to give their schools a competitive advantage, just like $100 handshakes and bags of cash and free Trans-Ams decades ago, they're going to find a way. I don't know what it's going to look like. Like when revenue share went live, when NIL went live in 2021, nobody had a concept of what a collective was. That wasn't even part of our vernacular the day NIL went live. But that's what was born out of the system. Something else is going to happen whereby boosters, collectives are still going to try to find ways to funnel money to student athletes to get them to play for their favorite team to get a competitive advantage. I just don't know what it looks like yet. So yes, it's a skeptical point of view, but I would also argue it's a realistic point of view. Stay tuned. A lot more to go. All right, Tiger basketball on the floor against Tennessee. We'll give you a thumbnail preview next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. LSU hosts Tennessee at the Maravich Center on Tuesday night, 8 o'clock game on the SEC Network. It is likely not going to go great for the good guys. Tennessee is a 10.5-point favorite in this ball game. The Vols are 22-5 overall. They're 9-5 in the league, and despite being 9-5 in the conference, Tennessee is still ranked 5th nationally. That goes to speak to just how tough and deep this SEC is. But Tennessee, a 10.5-point road favorite over LSU, and ESPN Analytics gives Tennessee a 78% chance of winning this game over LSU on the 25th. Now, LSU has been obviously better at home than they have been on the road, but this is a mighty tall task. Rick Barnes is a coach that throughout his career has struggled in the NCAA tournament, but has always had good, talented, well-coached teams that generally shoot it very well. Cam Carter for LSU, we've talked about him a ton all year. He averages 17 a game, and he has got to go for LSU to go. Sakai Ziegler is averaging 13-7 for Tennessee. Chaz Lanier, who is coming off a 30-point performance in Tennessee's win over Texas A&M. Lanier is averaging 17 points per game over his last 10 games. Tennessee can score, and another hallmark of Rick Barnes' teams is that they always defend. So this is a Tennessee team that is holding their opponents to 66 points per game. By comparison, LSU's opponents score 77 a game. So Tennessee defensively is 11 points per game better than LSU. It's not surprising that they are where they are. They're one of the top teams in the country. They're ranked number 5 in the country. The current net rankings, as you look at it, it's Auburn, Duke, Houston, Florida, Tennessee. The team you just played is 4th in the net. The team you play on Tuesday is 5th in the net. It's just the nature of how the SEC is this year. It's why I wasn't trying to be negative, but whenever LSU was going through that stretch where they beat Oklahoma and South Carolina, I said, enjoy it because you're not winning again. You lost to Florida. Now you get to play number 5, Tennessee. After that, you're on the road at number 24, Mississippi State, then at number 17, Kentucky. Then you're home against number 12, Texas A&M. So it's an unenviable schedule. It's the nature of the SEC this season. This is not a game that I anticipate LSU winning, but we'll see how it's going to be a late tip as well with an 8 o'clock tip. We'll see how they do. One interesting thing, if you are going to the game, is maybe pose as an LSU student or dig out your old student ID. Of course, with the Mardi Gras being a week away, LSU is giving the first 1,000 students at the Maravich Center for Tuesday's game LSU Mardi Gras edition basketball jerseys. Now, if you have ever listened to any of my content, if you're an everydayer, thank you for that. But I am very much a uniform traditionalist. But I don't even mind this at all because I'm a uniform traditionalist when you have a classic look. The Yankee pinstripes are a classic look. LSU's home football game, the uniform, the gold, white, gold, is a classic, unmistakable look. Southern Cal's home uniforms are a classic look. I'm not okay with messing up a classic look. If Oregon wants to wear 10,000 uniform combinations, God bless you. No, Oregon has no classic look. Nobody knows what Oregon is. They know Oregon now because they created that brand out of changing their uniform so much. Good for you. It was creative. They were able to do it because of Phil Knight. LSU basketball doesn't have a classic look. They don't. They've had some cool uniforms over the years. Some I like better than what they wear right now. But you want to change it up? Fine. I kind of wish the team would actually wear these in the game. But it's pretty cool. It says, let the good times roll on the back neck with a fleur-de-lis. It's got it's a purple jersey with green and gold trim around the neck and the shoulders. And the numerals are gold with a little green shadow on them as well. So not a bad look and a pretty cool one-off. So if anyone's going to the game and you want to snag me one, I'm a size large. I'd love it. But I asked last week that people snag me one of the sweatshirts I handed out at the baseball game as well. But nobody came through for me on that one either. But I would love it if you wouldn't mind. I will compensate you if you're able to get to the game and snag one for me. Tell an LSU student near you that I'll pay for it in any event. Maybe that'll be the most fun part of the game, or maybe LSU surprises all and pulls an upset, but not likely. LSU in Tennessee, 8 o'clock tip Tuesday at the PMAC. Okay, that'll do it for us here on today's episode of Locked On LSU. Hey, thanks so much for making us your first listen. Now for your second listen, how about you check out Locked On College Basketball with Isaac Shade and Andy Patton. Don't wait for March. Be the most informed college basketball fan now. Find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Okay, if you are listening on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked On LSU, your team every day.